Act 2. The path downward wound through stone and shadow, each step carrying Orpheus further from the world of the living. At first, the way was merely dim, like walking through a forest at twilight. But as he descended, true darkness gathered around him. Not the simple absence of light that mortals know, but something denser, older, heavy with the weight of all the lives that had passed this way never to return. His lyre provided the only illumination, not with any visible light, but with sound that seemed to make the darkness navigable, as if the notes could feel their way through the gloom. The air grew colder with each downward step, carrying scents that belonged to no living place. Stone that had never known sunlight, water that had never reflected sky, the faint metallic tang of the rivers that divide the living from the dead. Orpheus's breath misted before him, each exhalation a small ghost fleeting upward, as if even his breath sought to escape this realm while it could. Strange sounds reached him through the darkness, whispers that might have been wind, or might have been the sighs of countless souls, the distant clank of chains, the splash of oars in water that no mortal boat should sail. But beneath it all was silence, the profound quiet that comes not from absence of sound, but from the presence of ending. It was the silence that waits after the last note of a song, extended into eternity. His fingers moved on the lyre strings of their own accord, drawing forth a melody that had never been played before and would never be played again. It was a song of descent, each note falling like a stone into dark water, creating ripples of sound that spread outward through the shadows. The music spoke of the world above, sunlight on leaves, the warmth of skin against skin, the taste of wine and bread and morning air. It was a reminder and a plea combined, saying, "I am alive, I am love. I do not belong here, but I have come." The first guardian he encountered was not the ferryman, as the tales would later tell, but something older and less defined, a presence in the darkness that was darkness itself given form and hunger. It rose before him like a wave of night, and Orpheus felt it testing the boundaries of his mortality, pressing against the warm bubble of life he carried within him. For a moment, his fingers faltered on the strings, and in that pause, the darkness surged closer, eager to claim him. But then Orpheus sang, not just played, but gave voice to his music for the first time since entering this realm. He sang of Eurydice, of the morning she died, of love cut short by fate's cruel jest. The darkness paused, held by something it had never encountered before. Beauty that acknowledged death yet did not surrender to it. Slowly, like a great tide receding, the presence withdrew, leaving the path clear. Orpheus understood then that his music was more than passport here. It was a light that even the oldest darkness must respect. The path opened onto the shores of the Styx, that river which mortals name but do not truly know. It was not water as the living understand water, but something thicker, darker, carrying within its flow the memory of every tear ever shed, every sorrow ever suffered. The far shore was invisible in the gloom, and the river's width seemed to change with looking, now narrow as a stream, now broad as the sea itself. Charon waited at his eternal post, the ferryman who had plied these waters since before the gods were young. His boat was made of shadows and forgetfulness, held together by the weight of duty and the coins of the dead. He was old beyond age, his face a map of sorrows, witnessed but not felt, his eyes empty as the sockets of a skull, yet somehow still seeing. When he spoke, his voice was the whisper of oars in dark water, the settling of grave earth, the last breath leaving the body. "You have no coin," the ferryman said, and it was not a question. "You have no right of passage. The living do not cross this water." Orpheus lifted his lyre in answer. The first notes that sprang from the strings were silver bright, coins of sound spinning through the darkness. He played of journeys and destinations, of rivers crossed in hope and faith, of the ferryman's long labor and longer loneliness. He played of Charon himself, not as the grim figure legend painted, but as the last kind hand that guides the fearful dead to their rest, the necessary bridge between what was and what must be. The ferryman's ancient hands grew still upon his oar. Something shifted in those empty eyes, not quite emotion, but perhaps the memory of emotion, like an echo of what it once meant to feel. When Orpheus began to sing, adding words to the melody, Charon did something he had not done since before memory began. He wept. The tears that fell from those hollow eyes were not water, but something stranger, the crystallized sorrow of ages falling like dark jewels into the darker river. "Bored," Charon said when the song ended, his voice rougher than before, as if those tears had carved new channels in it. "But know this, living man, I ferry you across, but I make no promise of return. The river flows one way only, and I am bound by laws older than your gods." The journey across the Styx was like sailing through liquid night. The boat moved without wind or current, propelled by Charon's will alone. Around them, the river whispered with voices of the dead, not words, but the sound words leave behind when meaning has been stripped away. Orpheus played softly as they traveled, his music a small sphere of warmth and memory in the cold flow of forgetfulness. On the far shore, the true realm of the dead began. Here was the field of asphodel, where countless souls wandered in gray twilight, neither happy nor sad, but simply diminished. They were shadows of who they had been, retaining the shape but not the substance of life. As Orpheus passed among them, his music drew them like moths to flame. They pressed close, these faded spirits, reaching out with hands that could not quite touch, yearning toward the music with a hunger they could no longer name. He played for them as he walked, played memories of sunshine and laughter, of small daily joys and grand passions. Some of the shadows grew more solid as they listened, their features sharpening as if his music restored, however briefly, some hint of who they had been. A woman who might have been a baker in life smiled as his song recalled the scent of fresh bread. A warrior's shade stood straighter, remembering honor and purpose. Children's spirits laughed, though no sound came from their insubstantial throats. But Orpheus could not linger, though pity moved him. Somewhere in this gray realm, or deeper still, Eurydice waited. He hardened his heart against the pleading looks of the forgotten dead and pressed onward, following paths that seemed to shift and change with each step, as if the geography of death was not fixed, but fluid, shaped by the expectations and fears of those who walked here. The way grew darker and more terrible as he descended. He passed the pool where Tantalus stood in eternal hunger and thirst, reaching forever for fruit that withdrew from his grasp, stooping to drink water that receded from his lips. When Orpheus's music reached him, the old sinner paused in his futile efforts, and for the first time in ages, beyond counting, the fruit hung still and the water did not flee. Tantalus did not reach for them. Instead, he stood transfixed by the music, and on his face was an expression of satiation, more complete than any food or drink could provide. Further on, Sisyphus labored with his boulder, pushing it up the hillside only to watch it roll back down, over and over in endless repetition. But when the notes of Orpheus's lyre found him, the condemned king stopped his pushing and simply listened. The boulder, too, grew still, balanced impossibly on the slope, as if even stone could be charmed by such music. Sisyphus sat upon his burden and wept, not tears of frustration, but of something like joy, hearing in the music a reminder of what it meant to rest. The vultures that eternally tore at Tityus's liver paused in their feast, heads cocked to catch the melody. Ixion's wheel ceased its spinning, giving the bound king his first respite from dizzy torment. Even the Furies themselves, those ancient avengers with snakes for hair and blood for tears, found their rage quieted by the song. They listened with something approaching wonder on their terrible faces, and the snakes in their hair swayed gently, as if dancing to the rhythm. Cerberus, the three-headed hound who guards the gates of the deeper realm, should have been Orpheus's greatest challenge. The beast was vast as a hill and dark as midnight, with teeth like swords and eyes like burning coals. Each of his heads was large enough to swallow a man whole, and his bark could shatter stones and drive the dead themselves to deeper despair. He rose as Orpheus approached, all three throats growling a warning that shook the ground. But Orpheus neither faltered nor fled. Instead, he played a song of dogs, not the monstrous guardian before him, but the simple, loyal hounds of the upper world. He sang of faithful companions waiting by doorways for masters who would come home, of puppies tumbling in spring grass, of the ancient friendship between human and hound that began when both were young in the world. His music spoke to something buried deep beneath Cerberus's terrible exterior, some memory of what it meant to be loved rather than feared. The great dog's growls softened to whines. One by one, the three heads lowered, and the burning eyes dimmed to something almost gentle. Cerberus lay down before the gates, his tail, that serpent thing that writers would later describe, actually wagging slightly. As Orpheus passed, one of the heads stretched out to sniff his hand, and he paused to stroke the midnight fur, feeling beneath it a warmth that had nothing to do with the fires of punishment. Beyond Cerberus lay the palace of the dead, and here Orpheus's courage almost failed him. The building, if building it could be called, was vast beyond mortal comprehension, its walls made of compressed shadows, its pillars carved from crystallized screams. It existed in more dimensions than living eyes could process, so that looking at it too long brought vertigo and madness. This was the seat of power for the lords of the dead, the throne room where Hades and Persephone held court over their gray kingdom. Orpheus walked through halls where the walls wept black tears, and the floor was paved with the broken promises of the living. Strange courtiers passed him, not the simple shades of the fields above, but older things, darker things, beings that had never known sunlight and never wished to. They whispered among themselves as he passed, and their whispers were like the sound of earth falling on coffin lids. At last, he came to the throne room itself, and here was a sight to stop the heart of even the bravest hero. The space was vast as a night sky turned inside out, lit by a light that was not light, but visible darkness. Two thrones dominated the chamber, carved from single blocks of shadow stone that seemed to absorb hope itself. Upon them sat the lords of the dead. Hades was terrible in his majesty, a figure of such absolute authority that the air itself seemed to bow in his presence. His face was neither cruel nor kind, but implacable as the grave itself. In his hand was a scepter that commanded the obedience of every soul that had ever died, and his crown was wrought from the darkness that waited before the first star was lit. To look upon him was to understand, truly understand, that death was not a person, but a law, and Hades was that law-given form. Beside him sat Persephone, and she was terrible in a different way. Where Hades was endings, she was transformations. Where he was finality, she was the strange beauty that blooms in decay. She was spring's daughter dwelling in winter's house, and in her face was both the memory of flowers and the patience of seeds waiting in dark earth. Her beauty was not diminished by her realm, but had become something richer and stranger, like a rose that bloomed black petals. Around the throne room stood the court of the dead, judges and ministers, servants and counselors, all the machinery of death's governance. They watched Orpheus with eyes that held no sympathy, for sympathy was a luxury the dead could not afford. He was an anomaly, a disruption in the ordered procession of souls, and they waited to see how their lords would deal with this unprecedented intrusion. Orpheus stood before the thrones, suddenly aware of how small and mortal he was, how presumptuous his mission. What was his grief against the grief of all the world? What was his loss against the losses tallied here every moment of every day? But then he thought of Eurydice, her laughter, her warmth, the way she moved through the world like dancing, and he lifted his lyre. The first note rang through the throne room like a bell struck in a tomb. It was pure and clear and absolutely alive, and its presence here was shocking as blood on snow. The assembled dead drew back from it, but Hades and Persephone leaned forward on their thrones, interested despite themselves. For here was something new in their ancient realm, and even gods grow weary of the same songs sung forever. Orpheus played as he had never played before. His fingers found notes between the notes, harmonies that existed in the spaces between sound and silence. He did not play of death. What could he tell these powers that they did not already know? Instead, he played of life, but life as the dead might remember it, life as precious because it ends. He played of morning coffee and evening wine, of the weight of a sleeping lover's head on one's shoulder, of arguments and reconciliations, of all the tiny, vital moments that make up a life. Then he began to sing, and his voice was his heart made audible. He sang not to the king and queen before him, but to the entire realm of the dead, to every soul that had ever loved and lost, to the very stones of this underground palace that had heard so much sorrow. He sang Eurydice's name, and in that name was every beloved name ever called into the darkness. He sang of their meeting, their wedding, their parting, and in his song was every meeting, every wedding, every parting that had ever been. I come not as hero or conqueror, he sang, not to challenge your rule or steal from your realm. I come as all men come to you eventually, brought here by love and loss. But I come too soon, and I come asking for what has never been granted, a second chance, a revision of the story, a dawn after the darkest night. You who rule here know all endings. But do you remember beginnings? You who catalog all sorrows, do you recall joy? My wife lies in your halls, taken by chance and mischance, before her thread was measured out. The snake that bit her stole, decades that were ours by right. I do not ask you to break your laws, only to bend them, once for love. If you have ever loved, and Lord Hades, did you not risk the wrath of all Olympus for Persephone? And lady, do you not remember the sunlight? And does your mother Demeter not mourn your absence half the year? Then you know why I am here. Not because I am brave, for I am not. Not because I am wise, for love has made me foolish. But because to live without her is not to live at all, and so I have nothing left to lose. Grant me this. Let Eurydice return with me to finish the life that was cut short. When her natural years are done, I swear by every oath that binds, we will return to you willingly, and our shades will serve in your halls gladly, knowing we were given the gift of completion. Deny me this, and you gain only one soul before its time, and break another that will never heal. Grant it, and you prove that even death can know mercy. The song ended, but its echo continued long after, reflected and refracted by the strange acoustics of the throne room, until it seemed the very walls were singing. In the silence that followed, something unprecedented happened. From the eyes of the Furies dripped tears, not blood, but true tears, salt and water and sorrow. The judges of the dead bowed their heads. Somewhere in the distance, the Styx itself seemed to pause in its flow. And on her throne, Persephone turned to her husband. What passed between them in that glance was a conversation of centuries, a weighing of law against mercy, precedent against exception. They were the balance, he the weight of law, she the possibility of exception. In her eyes was spring's argument against winter's certainty. At last, Hades spoke, and his voice was the closing of tomb doors, the settling of earth, the final silence. But in it, too, was something that might have been understanding. Never before, he said, has the law of death been broken for love. Heroes have come here with swords and strength, and they have failed or succeeded according to their power. But you come with empty hands and a full heart, and your weapon is beauty itself. How can we, who rule over endings, deny such a beginning? He raised his scepter, and the shadows in the room shifted and swirled. Let Eurydice be called forth. From the depths of the palace came a stirring, a movement of shadows that gradually took form. And there, pale as moonlight on water, insubstantial as morning mist, but unmistakably herself, was Eurydice. Her shade glided forward, and when she saw Orpheus, something like color returned to her ghostly features. She reached out to him, and he to her, but Persephone raised a hand before they could touch. "Hold," the queen said, and her voice was gentle as spring rain, but implacable as winter frost. A condition must be placed on this gift, for the laws of the universe bend but do not break. You may lead her back, Orpheus, by the same path you descended. But you must not look back at her until both of you stand complete in the sunlight of the upper world. Trust that she follows, for doubt will undo what love has won. This is the price of the impossible. Faith absolute and unquestioning. Orpheus nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. What was one condition against the miracle of reunion? What was a test of trust when weighed against resurrection? He turned to begin the journey back, and behind him, silent as shadows themselves, Eurydice's shade began to follow. The court of the dead watched them go in silence, and in that silence was both blessing and curse, hope and the foreknowledge of hope's failure. For they were the dead, and they knew how all stories end. But for this moment, in this eternal place, they allowed themselves to believe that perhaps, just once, love might prove stronger than law. As Orpheus led his silent follower back through the halls of shadow, his lyre sang a different song, no longer pleading but grateful, no longer sorrow but joy barely contained. Behind him, Eurydice's footsteps made no sound, cast no shadow, left no trace, but he could feel her presence like warmth at his back, like the memory of sunlight in a dark place. The journey upward began, and with each step, the weight of what they attempted pressed heavier on them both, for they were reversing the irreversible, unwriting what had been written, walking against the current of the river that flows only one way. And somewhere in the darkness between death and life, between trust and doubt, their fate waited to unfold.